Is Casey Washington, wide receiver from the Atlanta Falcons, a dynasty sleeper? We're talking about that in today's video. Just a quick announcement. If you'd like to join our Discord, the link to our Patreon to get the Discord link is in the description of the video. And if you do join us there, we will answer basically any question you have, dynasty, redraft, best ball, DFS, all of that good stuff. So check that out if you're interested. And today we are talking about Casey Washington, who's been making a lot of news lately in OTAs about just how dominant he's been playing, about how much he's killing it. And so he's honestly someone that I didn't scout pre-NFL draft process. So I went back and looked at some of the numbers, the advanced metrics, the raw numbers, and also the film, and kind of, formed an opinion on what I think about Casey Washington. So I'm going to share this with you here. We're always trying to find that next sleeper, right? We always want to find the next Puka Nacua or whoever it is, sleeper, to help us win our dynasty leagues. And honestly, that's what's the fun about dynasty, is finding those players. So Casey Washington is probably potentially out there on your waiver wire that maybe you want to stash if you have room, especially in deeper leagues, potentially stash him and, see what happens during training camp, because it's the dead zone of the NFL season, right? It's June 20th. Training camps are still about a month away or so. When that gets going and he starts to flash even more in training camp, if he does, someone's going to pick him up. So here are his numbers here, kind of his profile. I did this with all the players, fantasy relevant players that I scouted. You could check out those videos if you're interested. Casey Washington, 6'2", 190, went to the University of Illinois. Good size there at 6'2", 190. You see his 2023 numbers of 49 catches, 670 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And he went round 6 to the Atlanta Falcons. His combine numbers, he actually didn't run at the combine. I think maybe he was injured. I forget why he didn't. But these are pro day numbers. He ran a 4.48, which is good solid speed. His 10-yard split is not great. We generally want to see this number at like 1.55 or lower. That's measuring how fast you are within the first 10 yards, which a lot of teams are starting to value a little bit more over the 40-yard dash, because it's very rare, even for wide receivers, to be running for 40 yards straight line, right? It's much more common to run 10 yards in a straight line. And so how fast you are in that initial 10 yards is sometimes more valuable for wide receivers and running backs. And again, generally we want to see this number at 1.55 or lower. Once you start getting below 1.55, it's like, okay, you are really fast. You have really good explosiveness off the line of scrimmage. His broad jump number at 127 is really, really good. Now, these are probably the three most important numbers when it comes to determining fantasy value for receivers: the 40-yard time, the 10-yard split, or the 10-yard split and the broad jump especially. You can see here some of his production numbers at Illinois. He did play there at Illinois for 5 years, from 2019 to 2023. So, he was at Illinois for a long, long time. He's 23 years old, so he's a little bit of an older prospect, but that's okay. That's why one of the reasons why he fell a little bit. But you see his production in college, it just kind of wasn't there. 10% career dominator, which means what percentage of Illinois' passing offense was he responsible for, both yards and touchdowns? 10% over his 5 years. Actually, I think that's over 4 years at Illinois. His first year I didn't include because, he just wasn't really on the field. And generally you're not on the field too much when you're a rookie, freshman in college. So, but 10%, we generally want to see this number north of 20%. I went back and I mentioned this in a lot of my videos. I went back and looked at every single fantasy relevant receiver from basically 2010 until last year, 2023. And there was only, I believe, 2 players that had a career dominator of under 20%. And that was Terry McLaurin and Jalen Waddle. Those are the only 2 players to have a career dominator in college under 20%. And it makes sense, right? If you're going to be good in the NFL, it probably means you should be one of the best receivers on your team, right? And Illinois, not necessarily known for its receivers. So that is a red flag. Like, why wasn't he just more productive in terms of the percentage of what he was responsible for in college? Now, I will say this. He did have a single season high of 19%, just under, again, 20% is what we want to see in a single season and over a career as well. North of 20%, 25%. He didn't break out at all because he never hit 20%. You have to hit 20% to have a breakout age. And his PFF grade is, slightly above average. Something I will say, though, is a lot of this low dominator number and production profile, a lot of it is because of lack of touchdowns. He literally only scored 4 touchdowns in his career, and they all came last year in 2023. So, like, you look at his numbers, just kind of looking at his numbers, not taking into account just, touchdowns, they were definitely better. He was at 10%, 16%, 12%. Before he hit 19% last year. So that's a big thing. He's just not a touchdown guy. At least he wasn't in college. And so that really did hurt his production profile a little bit. Looking at some of the advanced metrics here, 1.32 yards per route run is not great. ADOT is nice at 11.2. Drop percentage is really nice at 5.4%. That's a pretty solid number. The drop percentage. Yards after catch per reception, nothing really great there at 3.4. His contested catch percentage, though, is pretty impressive. At almost 51% of his contested targets, he was catching. And when you turn on the film and watch him, you definitely notice that. Now, another thing that's a little bit concerning is the contested target percentage. How many of his targets were contested? And why I think that's a little bit of a red flag. Well, one, it's a little high, 28%. That's actually pretty high, not just a little high. And two, I think this kind of translates a lot to how good of a route runner you are. If you are a really good route runner, you're going to get yourself open a lot. You're going to find the holes in the zone of a zone coverage, or you're going to kind of juke out your man defender when he's defending you to get open, right? Good route runners are generally going to have a low contested target percentage. Whereas Casey Washington didn't really have that. He had 28%. Generally, we want to see this below 20%. Above 20%, we don't want to see. Below 20%, we want to see. Below 15% is where it really starts to get interesting. So, you just kind of go back and look at some players who have been successful and, kind of look at what their contested target percentage is. It's generally a little bit lower. Now, that's not to say it's the be-all, end-all, because there is no number that is the be-all, end-all, right? And the perfect example is Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua last year had a contested target percentage of 22%. So high, right? Again, above 20, we don't want to see. Below 20, we want to see. His was at 22%. It's pretty high, I'd say. And we saw what Puka Nacua did. He just set the single season receiving yard for a rookie. So, again, it's not the be-all, end-all. It's just something that I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to. These guys that have a low contested target percentage number, I think a lot of that is due to their route running. Not 100%. If you get a lot of screens behind the line of scrimmage passes, that number is going to be lower. If the quarterback is not very good at getting you the ball in the right spot, that number could be a little bit higher than we want. So you have to keep all that stuff in mind. Yards per route run by coverage schemes, he was a little bit better in zone than man, but still not really impressive numbers here. Overall, the production profile, not quite there in college. Some of the underlying stats besides his contested catch ability are not really there. He played out wide mostly for Illinois, which is a little bit of a benefit, like that he's potentially an outside receiver, because if you're just a slot guy, you're generally what you want ideally is a player who can play both outside and in the slot. In 2 wide receiver sets, they play outside. In 3 or 4 wide receiver sets, or even 5, they play in the slot. Because if you're able to move everywhere, you're going to get huge. Think of CD Lamb and players like that. If you could only play on the outside, you're not going to have that top end peak season, in my opinion. If you can only play in the slot, you're not going to have that. So that's why it's a little bit important to kind of see both. Maybe he can play in the slot in the NFL. I don't know, but in college at Illinois, they basically used him exclusively outside. So that is better than being exclusively in the slot. I will say that. So overall, what we see here is nothing really jumping off the page besides the contested catch percentage of over 50%. On the film, watching him though, you definitely see potential there. You definitely see potential when you just go and watch some of the film, some of his games, even highlights. I do warn you a little bit about highlights, because you're seeing the best of the best, right? You're not seeing every single snap, and you're not seeing the plays where they failed. So I do, just be careful when you watch highlights, but if that's all you can find, that's all you can find, right? He doesn't have a lot of film out there, Casey Washington, but when you watch him, the contested catch stuff really jumps off the page, and which is great because he needs to catch things over the middle, which he's great at. He can bring in kind of throws that are not in his frame. They're a little bit behind or a little bit ahead. He's really good at bringing those in. He can break tackles after the catch. He's pretty good after the catch in terms of breaking tackles. He doesn't have a lot of yak, but there are times when you watch him, when he gets into those yak scenarios, he can break some tackles. Again, he has the size and the strength, in my opinion, to be an outside receiver and a run blocker as well, which is underrated because teams want their wide receivers to be able to block. If you're not going to be able to block, you're not going to be on the field a lot. You have less opportunity to get on the field because they want versatility. If you have good run blocking wide receivers, well, that opens up a lot of play action and things like that as well. Again, the weaknesses, the lack of production really jumps off the page. Doesn't really have any any athletic trait that really, you can pencil in, be like, oh, this guy's a supreme speedster, he jumps through the gym type of thing, right? Jumps out of the gym and stuff like that, which is part of the reason why he fell to the 6th round. Just finding the holes in the zone is something I noticed a lot, just being better at that because so much of the NFL is zone coverage these days. And very little of most teams are playing 30 to 40% in man coverage and 60 to 70% in zone coverage. And you have to be able to find the holes in zones and kind of win in the zone. So overall, he's interesting. He's interesting. And a big thing that makes him interesting is that he's on the Falcons. And the Falcons seriously need, two things. He's on the Falcons, right? And they seriously need a consistent second wide receiver. They have Drake London, who we all expect to take a big leap this year. They have Kyle Pitts, who's probably going to be second on the team in targets at the tight end position. But then after that, you have Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore. And, both those players have potential to be a little bit consistent options as a second and third receiver. But I'm not penciling them in for being that, right? Like someone could take their job if they're just flat out better, right? It's not a situation where you have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith or Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, where there's no way in hell a 6th-round rookie with lacking in production profile and athleticism is going to take the job of Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle, right? Here we have a situation where, like, if he's just a little bit better than them, which is not saying, which is very, very possible, he could take the place of someone like a Darnell Mooney, right? I wouldn't be surprised if some point in the season, if Casey Washington is legit, takes over Darnell Mooney's job and makes him kind of redundant. I don't think he's going to take over Rondale Moore's. I think Rondale Moore kind of has his role. So that's one thing that's very intriguing. The opportunity is definitely there in Atlanta. And the second thing is, this is, the coaching staff. I was just reading something. The coaching staff comes from the Rams system, right? You have Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson, the quarterbacks coach for the Rams, the last year or two, I believe. He was like the passing game guy, I think the last 2 years. Passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach 2022 and 2023. Those players those coaches are coming from the scheme which found Cooper Kupp in round 3, which found Kyron Williams in round 5, which found Puka Nacua in round 5. So they probably have an eye for what they want to see from their receivers and offensive weapons. So I do think that's another benefit there. So I think he's an interesting stash right now, like getting him now, because when training camps start, you're going to potentially hear news about how great he is. And the people that aren't really paying attention right now, they don't care about OTAs. So go out there and maybe stash him if you can. And then just see how training camp goes. And he's an easy drop if he just doesn't do anything, if he doesn't materialize into anything. But if he does, then you have a potential steal on hand. So there you have it, guys. That's Casey Washington and my opinions about him. Let me know what you think in the comments about him. Like and subscribe to the channel. Check out the Discord, and catch you guys all in the next video.